Good afternoon, and welcome to the Arlington County Board's concluding capital improvement plan work session. We have a fairly short agenda, but we will have a staff presentation. We're going to talk about items for follow-up over the coming week, a few guidance suggestions, and guidance that I know colleagues are working on. And then we will also talk about what will be on the fall referenda and go through that at a high level. So I'll send it to the manager for the staff presentation on the referenda, I believe.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Cowan, and I think she's probably going to turn it over to Jason Fries, and who knows who Jason will turn it over to.
So what we wanted to do, was to give a quick run through of all the referenda questions that you've seen and gotten the details on during the work session presentation, and then a little bit just on timing and schedules and the outreach we're doing. So Jason just has a few quick slides to do that.
Sure. Thank you, and good afternoon. Jason Fries, Department of Management and Finance. Yep, so I'm going to walk you through really quickly the 2021 bond referenda on the county side and the school side, and then talk a little bit about, as Michelle said, the process from here until November 2nd when the election is. So if we go to 2 slides down from here. Correct, thank you. So what I'll first talk about is, and these should not look new to you, these are the same categories that the county typically has, but we are looking as part of this year's CIP, the fiscal year 22 through 24 CIP, to place on the referenda $62.54 million of bonds among 3 referenda categories. These are community infrastructure, parks and recreation, and metro and transportation. So in terms of the amounts, $17.1 million for community infrastructure, $6.8 million for parks and recreation, and then the largest of the categories, metro and transportation, which is heavily weighted on the metro contributions, $38.7 million. You will see on the slide here below the projects. Now these are the same that were in the proposed CIP. So with community infrastructure, you have the neighborhood conservation program at $2 million, some facilities maintenance capital for general projects throughout the county at $4.6 million, some renovations and some infrastructure improvements here at the courthouse complex, that's $8 million, and also some improvements across the street at the courts police building for $1.7, and then some preliminary design work for the Quincy site for $700,000. On the parks piece, there is $800,000 for preliminary planning of the Arlington Boathouse, as well as renovation and replacement of the Bluemont Park tennis courts for $5 million, and then $1 million for trail and bridge modernization. And then again on Metro, the largest portion of this referendum is Metro at $20.7 million, and then second largest paving, $17.5 million, and then $500,000 for maintenance and replacement of county bridges. So if we go to the next slide, the 4th referenda that will be on the ballot this fall will be Arlington Public Schools, and they are looking for an issuance of $23.01 million. And you will see here below, it's mostly on, this is renovation and replacement, some upgrades to various schools throughout the county. These are elementary, middle, and high schools, as well as some funding for their, what they call Phase 2 Option A of the Heights building, which is $11.39 million. And so what you've seen on the 2 slides here in terms of questions, this is the same format we typically show when we come to you each year. So nothing's really changed in terms of how we word each of these questions to the voters. The only thing that's changed for the most part is the amounts that we are asking this year. So if we go to the next slide, timeline. Right now, we are July 13th. So what has happened so far is that the schools have adopted their CIP and adopted their referendum request. On schools, what needs to happen first is the schools approves a request, and that comes to the county board for consideration. So that has already occurred. Next week, you all will be considering these 4 questions, the referendum amounts and the questions and explanations. So that will be considered next week. From there, the next steps we need to do procedurally are presenting a order to the judge, ordering the elections. That's no later than August 13th, 81 days before the election date. Next thing we will be doing is putting together some materials, and we have to remain neutral. You see here, it's footnoted at the bottom of the slide. Everything that the county puts together for the bond referendum needs to be neutral in tone. So we put out the questions and the explanations. And so you will see that as we consider next week at the next week's board meeting. New this year is that we typically put it in English and Spanish. We're adding 2 more languages. So we're adding Amharic and Mongolian as new languages. So those materials will be available on the county's website in August as soon as we can get those translated. And then on November 2nd, we will also have at each voting location, we will have handouts for the voters so they can read it in each of those 4 languages as they're waiting in line to vote on other questions as well as these bond referenda. After that, it's really procedural. We'll file with the circuit court the results, and then next year, when we do our next bond sale, this is a preliminary date, but May of 2022, we would be issuing the first tranche of those bonds. And that's actually it. Nice, short, and sweet. So open up to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Freeze. I appreciate the background. We will also talk guidance, but first I want to give colleagues an opportunity to ask questions on process and the slides that were just presented. Go ahead, Ms. Crystal.
Thank you. I'm looking at our proposed language for the referendum on slide 3, and thank you to our staff team for preparing this. We have a perennial question every time we prepare these bond questions, which is the level of detail that can actually go on the ballot itself. And Mr. Freeze, I'm really glad that you summarized for us some of the many other ways in which we will be communicating the second row, right, which is actually the level of detail that doesn't fit on a printed ballot. I am, however, looking at community infrastructure and looking at that through the lens of that sort of recurring discussion about whether our bond referenda are sufficiently specific, thinking that one is awfully general. And I wonder, this may be a small p, political question, and so one for the manager and actually for my colleagues as much as it is anything else. Do we think there is opportunity? I'll put my cards on the table. I think there might be opportunity to get a little more specific in that language, indicating, for example, that these are largely public facilities, maintenance projects, and public safety or court services projects, neighborhood conservation being the outlier there. Quincy site design, perhaps that could be bundled with transportation if that's its uses. I don't want to do this obviously from this work session table, but the cost of various capital projects is not the level of specificity I would hope to see on our ballots. And so I'm hoping we may be able to iterate on that a little bit over the coming days between now and Tuesday. I suppose I need to confirm that is not just the sense of one board member before I ask our staff to help us do that.
So confirmed on my part. I don't know, colleagues. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with all, as long as it passed legal muster and gives us the flexibility to, I think it just helps communicating with the voters, which is what we need to be doing. Yeah, thanks.
So I sort of there's a question in there for the board, and then there's sort of a question just with respect to, you want to keep flexibility, but I wondered if there's any way that maybe Ms. Cowan or Mr. Schwartz, you could speak at all to, there's pretty strong confidence in each of those dollar amounts. I mean, has this thought come up, the question that Ms. Crystal asked, on this community infrastructure bucket to this point, or is it still early in the process where you work with attorneys to get to something that's descriptive but not overly so specific that it wouldn't be broad enough we can move forward?
So, I think the idea is that, so for certain projects like the courthouse complex and renovations, those haven't been bid yet. That is certainly based on a design and engineering estimate, right? That's pretty far along. Once that project gets bid, then we'll have a better sense of exactly what that number is. And of course, before we issue bonds for the project. So they're not fully baked, but they're as close as they can be for what we need now. I think the idea, we can certainly, what Ms. Crystal asked for in terms of adding a little bit more specificity is certainly easy enough to do. We can come back and do that with keeping that flexibility that we might need to keep the project going. So I think this can be worked out if that answers your question.
Sure, that sounds good. So We'll proceed trying to get a little more specificity. A lot of them look like they're public safety capital pieces, and you all will know how to work that language. And of course, we'll want to, before it's finalized, probably the board would want to take a look just to see, but.
If I could just add, we can strike that balance, and then, of course, this will be a board report, right? We wanted to have this work session, so the plan is to get those board reports posted likely on Thursday, and we'll run the language before you, but then you'll have that opportunity to, amend, but you'll certainly see it, as will the public, in advance before next Tuesday's consideration. So
Great. You definitely don't want us iterating from the dais, so this is very strategic to
I think
bring it for us now.
on referenda in particular, yeah, we really, that's not what we want to have happen, especially if it's late at night, right?
Sure, thanks for that clarification, helps, and it's a reminder of everything that is this busy week in terms of CIP and the many items on Saturday and Tuesday's agendas. So are there any more questions on the presentation? If not, I will propose that we go to a sort of an organizing discussion that goes based on guidance, which I think is what either Ms. Cowan or Mr. Freeze is ready to talk to a little bit. I can, if you want to lay out categories, but why don't you start? I'm happy to also kind of identify categories if need be.
Sure, and if it's the, the pleasure of the board, I know Ms. Jacobs has this document, if you want to put it up. So just based on what we've heard during the work sessions and from, the five of you collectively, as we've discussed CIP over the last 2 months, it's hard to believe that we proposed this like back in May, and here we are in July at a different, different point in time. So it's been a while. There were 4 sort of different categories that we heard from you, and then open to, of course, any other additions at this point. And so this document summarizes these, and what this is meant to be is just a conversation about the topics you'd like to see in the guidance that you would then give us next Tuesday in written direction. And the idea would be, in talking with the chair, that we would help provide draft guidance that you all would then work through, and then obviously could be posted as well for next week's consideration. So there'd be detail and writing behind this, and that would be worked out over the next few days. So the intent of today is just sort of vet what would be included in that guidance. So these are all primarily in the transportation area, but then also a broader issue on sort of how we might consider, because we'll be back at this next year for a CIP. I think that's the most important thing to remember. So there's one last item that is a little bit more broad in terms of format, but the first was regarding doing an engineering feasibility study along Arlington Boulevard, where we've had some longstanding issues. The second is regarding a whole area of Columbia Pike and all the initiatives we're doing there. The third is our fleet electrification, and the fourth is this idea of when we present the next CIP, is there a way to better kind of link up the formatting of how we're presenting projects and how they link, say, to the CEP or different aspects of the master transportation plan, understanding that that very thick document in front of you may not always be accessible to all the various stakeholders in the way they might be searching for information. So sort of taking along a multi-year process where we get better at that. So those were the 4 areas, but I think, Mr. Chair, I would turn it over to you for an individual conversation on each. But that's what we heard so far, and if you have others, we're, happy to add to the list.
Great, thank you for that. We'll go to Mr. Karantonis.
Just a very small addition to that. The NCAC program, the Neighborhood Conservation Program. We've heard in the work session that the $2 million that we assigned for the first year of this 3-year CIP is very little, and it may damage the ability of the program to actually deliver on the vision of the program. So that's just to explore the possibility to improve its funding at this point.
Sure, so I'm glad, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think looking at number 1 and thinking that there may be some agreement, let's come back. I made a note here, the NCAC, we'll take that up. I would submit after the 4th of these items, and we can do additional guidance, additional discussion of areas for guidance that we'd finalize moving into next Tuesday. So the first, I know, Ms. Crystal, you've asked questions about this. I think this is related to the SUSMO, the Sustainable Mobility emails that we've received, and I'll let you describe it.
I mean, Mr. Chair, if it's helpful, I'm happy to characterize the first two and actually start on the fourth as well, since these are the ones I've sent over to staff to date. So as a reminder, the Arlington Boulevard bike path between Jackson Street and George Mason is our opportunity to start making progress on what will be the biggest missing link in a regional Capital Trail Coalition vision, which is the Arlington section of Arlington Boulevard. And we think, in fact, some of our community advocates think, and I would suggest rightfully so, that this area, Jackson to George Mason, is going to be one of the most challenging to really build out as a multimodal trail. And so our staff has very helpfully costed out what the feasibility and engineering would be required to do. It's $200,000, which I believe they think that they can fund from some of our existing fund balances. So we're all hope to have a little more direction to introduce on Tuesday night, specifically designating those funds. The reason I would propose we do that in this CIP, bridge CIP though it is so we can actually hopefully be in a position to consider maybe some real dollar investments in the earlier years of our 10-year plan by the time we reconvene in this time next year.
Great. And I like the thought of moving on towards 2, 3, and 4, but let's just hold for a second, because at least I've got my own inclination is to support this effort. And I just didn't know if colleagues had any comments on this one before we moved on to the next. Ms. Garvey and then Mr. Dorsey.
Yeah, I'm supportive of this. It seems to me that for whatever reason, we're hearing more and more about Route 50, and I know it won't be part of this feasibility study at all, but we've got a lot of interest in efforts to get more trees and beautification, and then, of course, we had another horrible accident, which I think people are interested in as well. So I think Arlington Boulevard is going to start to play a larger role in our future moving forward, and this is certainly a start, and so I'm supportive. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Garvey. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as someone who frequently realizes the broken or inadequate links on this stretch, I'm very supportive of this conceptually. I would just love to hear a little bit more maybe from Ms. Crystal or staff. Is there engineering difficulties that are there, or are we talking about issues of right-of-way, access, et cetera? It doesn't seem that complex to me to actually conceive of a trail there. So if someone could just speak a little bit more about some of the challenges that this study would.
You may know more about transportation engineering or multimodal engineering than I do, but I actually do think it's pretty complex, right? I mean, you have obviously the elevated overpass with Glebe, that there are some challenges to figure out whether you need a bridge or tunnel type situation. I think being one of the biggest challenges, but certainly the way it, the areas that are most adjacent to the residential neighborhoods, Jackson and the other named streets approaching Glebe are probably the least problematic. But I do think it's, to me anyway, a pretty open question what a multimodal facility would look like, especially at that intersection with Glebe. So I think there is some engineering feasibility that needs to be done, as well as just costing it out.
Okay.
Ms. Cowan?
Experts could speak to it.
No, I think that's right. And I think if we, in the end, when they develop the scope and take a look at what it means, if it's not 200, if it's something lighter, we'll report back to you. But I think we just want to be fulsome in what we're looking at, and we use the word engineering. So.
Got it. So it's conceptual design, not necessarily, we don't know how to achieve a solution. Got it. That helps me.
The reason I bring all of that up is I can imagine a universe in which the options that come back are costly. And so I think we should brace ourselves for that.
Thank you both. I'll go to Mr. Karantonis unless there was more. Mr. Karantonis, go ahead.
Very similar question. Why limit that to George Mason? I recognize that the big problems are, going over Glebe, or no, under Glebe is almost impossible. So over Glebe, and then also George Mason would be a similar challenge. The trail uses a mix of, existing trail, service roads, et cetera. And this goes all the way up to North Edison and even further. Why limit the study to up to Mason, from Jackson to Mason, and not go from Jackson to North Edison? Would we expect that this is too much or too expensive, or one piece at a time?
It's a fair question. I think we could follow it up. I don't have an answer offhand. I don't know, Ms. Cowan.
I mean, we could look at that. I mean, this was what was requested, and we'd have to figure out if it's much broader, how much more money. And I'm a little anxious at us developing a scope right now is And we know there's other work happening on Arlington Boulevard, so it was just in response to this request.
Fair, no,
Okay.
no question, I just wanted to know.
Thank you. So we've heard the sense of the board on this item, and we've heard a dollar amount, and I would submit that if you have additional questions between now and next Tuesday, I see staff is ready to talk further about it, but I think we have a general sense, so I'm going to move on to the second item. This is the implementation of the Columbia Pike initiatives, and you've summarized it, Ms. Cowan. We had discussion regarding transit signal prioritization at one of our work sessions. My takeaway from that is that you can't easily rush the studies, but that's a piece of it. I know there's also continued investment in multimodal and then the transit stations. So I didn't know if colleagues had comments on that. I see Ms. Crystal, go ahead.
Indeed, I mean, maybe to put a more editorial gloss on this, I would like us to give some direction this year, laying out our expectations for the Pike transit network to advance significantly in the next 12 months. I think that we are all frustrated, to put not too fine a point on it, that we are still not seeing the multimodal stations or the multimodal improvements and the transit stations come online in the timeline we all conceived of back in 2016 at the time we adopted the vision of the premium transit network. I know that there are plans in the works that our transportation staff has been sharing with stakeholders along the Pike, and I think it would be helpful for us to put a marker down about our expectations for the delivery of those stations, further multimodal improvements, and certainly the transit signal prioritization, which is going to be really integral to ensuring that our buses move effectively and quickly through the corridor. I think there's an opportunity to sort of smuggle in here under the Columbia Pike Initiative headline TSP in other parts of the county, because I know those studies are underway and we are expecting the results by the end of this year. And so I would like anyway this guidance to request that staff come back to us by the time of the next CIP with an implementation plan for transit signal prioritization. I think as we've heard from some advocates in the community, there's been a lot of studying of TSP, and it's time to know how we're going to get from studying to actually implementing. And so I'd like us to be pretty clear in this guidance that we would like a plan for implementation of TSP, certainly on Columbia Pike, or at least parts of Columbia Pike, and in some of the other corridors in which it's being studied.
Thank you, Ms. Crystal. I think that, for me at least, that takes care of the relative structure that I would want with respect to A of the above. For multimodal improvements, we've each, I think it's important that we surface this, we've each had been briefed on this by staff. For me, I think there's some decisions with respect to investments in multimodal and the timing of them that we might want to put in guidance. So, I mean, that I think also I feel fairly comfortable about. I guess there'd be a question as to the coming week and how much specificity we could get to on items B and C for me. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. In listening to Ms. Crystal, what I picked up, and perhaps incorrectly, what we're really looking for is an implementation plan, and to have that ready by the next CIP.
That's my request.
Yeah.
And I imagine, I mean, some of these corridors under study for TSB, the study may yield that it's infeasible, right? So if the implementation plan is, these are the corridors that are feasible, and here's how, you know, that's I think, something for us to react to, but you nailed it. Exactly.
Yeah, okay, so that sounds good. I just love staff's reaction to that.
That's right.
That seems reasonable.
I mean, the plan is, and I would let, Dennis also chime in, but, the plan is to get the study on the 6 or 5 corridors that we're looking at it, which is, sort of everywhere, if you will, across the county, be done by the end of the calendar year, early 22, so that we can get back to the manager and have recommendations. So I think that timing actually works right. And I think you are right. It is meant to be feasibility analysis. So it could be in some places it doesn't work, or it may not be worth the investment, or it's perfect here. So that I think that all can line up perfectly, unless Dennis or Sarah, you have anything else you'd want to add?
Mr. Leach.
I concur with Ms. Cowan. We are doing transit assessment of multiple corridors, 5 corridors, including Columbia Pike. And we are doing it at the intersection level to look at what kind of bus transit time improvements we can gain without sacrificing things like pedestrian access. So there is a balancing, and each corridor is different. We do also benefit from having NVTA funding to upgrade ITS, Intelligent Transportation System signals, in these corridors. So the recommendations from this study actually can build right on those investments that are already being made in the infrastructure to shift to implementation. And so I think the timing actually works really well for implementation by the next CIP.
That's great. Thank you, Ms. Garvey, for the questions. I want to be sure if I'm, or check, and we may have additional questions for you, Mr. Leach. On the other two, on multimodal and on transit stations, I'm not sure that I'm all the way there on the next CIP. I think there's a possibility, at least, that I might be interested in some updates sooner on those two items. And so we'd have to work out timing of that, and whether we can develop structured but not too specific guidance over the coming week is kind of the question. I want to go to Mr. Carantonis and then Ms. Crystal.
Well, in a very similar note, I mean, we have been trying to get implementation timelines and assurances on the multimodal improvement project, on the transit stations. Signal prioritization has been a long-term project. So it would be helpful to identify what, I mean, after having already done so much on multimodal and Columbia Pike, to identify what is the problem really? What throws us every single time out of the timeline? Why has it been so difficult to deliver in a concise timeline, in a predictable timeline, the multimodal improvements? So, I mean, I reflect the sentiment of many people who live along Columbia Pike, myself included, that it has been taking way too long. So that has been many, many years in the making. So we have to be able to say now, what exactly is the problem, how we are intending to solve these problems after what we learned so far, because we learned a lot. Sure. That applies to the transit station, that applies and definitely to the multimodal improvements. That doesn't apply to signal prioritization because this is a new thing, and I understand that it's challenging.
Great. So I think that's for perhaps Mr. Leach. There could be two components, and you know it well. So it could be that multimodal and transit stations are in the same, but there are components of multimodal that seem distinct from transit stations. But can you shed light on that?
Sure. So on the multimodal project, rebuilding an arterial street, including all of its utilities, is a complex undertaking that many communities don't do. But I would say the payoff of having much better pedestrian accessibility, a much better front door for business and residents, is absolutely worth it. The big wild cards in this kind of utility underground and utility reconstruction work are two. One is working with the private utilities, Dominion, Washington Gas, Comcast, Verizon, that are not beholden to the county. We have to keep them engaged, and Dominion actually does the design of their lines. And the other, I would say, really challenging wild card for us is easements. We don't control all of the land that we need to construct the improvements, which means negotiations with private properties up and down the Pike. You have a number of those on your Saturday agenda for segment F. Our real estate bureau, as well as we've also brought in outside consultants to help, are working every day to try to get those easements secured for all the remaining segments. But I would say those are things that are not completely in county control that can really have an impact on the timeline.
Thank you, Mr. Leach. Ms. Cowan, did you have sort of high-level thoughts about those two components? Of course, the west end of the Pike, we've seen some progress on the multimodal, but I don't know if you have any guidance or thoughts as we try to organize this.
We'd certainly be happy to, come back to the board because with more detail, maybe an upcoming manager's report or something like that. But I think I want to applaud DES, the Engineering Bureau and Transportation And they've really now, with the lessons we learned just from this last segment about things that went well and things that didn't go well on MOTs, what we need to do for location of utilities before we start construction, how we run our design and engineering processes, which have now really fed into a detailed segment-by-segment plan where we've overlaid each of the construction cycles and timelines and how it's all going to work. So I'm feeling like we've learned a lot and we are in a much better place where we can, lay out with, construction is construction, right? You never know when you dig something up what you might find, but where we can lay out some placeholders that are timelines that are more firm than they have been in the past. I think we have the right group of staff and the engineering team working on that. But to your point, I think we can be a little bit more specific in the guidance that is given with some of those caveats.
Great, so that helps me somewhat on multimodal. Ms. Crystal.
Perfect segue, because I wanted to talk about 2C. Mr. Chair, you made an excellent point, which is with regarding transit signal priority, we want to plan an implementation plan by the time we meet on the next CIP. To be clear, my expectation is the Columbia Pike Transit Stations, the first 8, my understanding of the timeline is those stations should be done by the time we adopt the next CIP. That's correct, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, so I would like that to be in guidance, right? That expectation. It's not a plan to install those first 8 stations after we first laid the groundwork for them, 5 years ago. It is that they will be complete by spring, or maybe we even stretch it and say Q3 of 2022.
Great. So that helps because I had not had that as clearly. Mr. Karantonis.
I mean, the only A is a new project. B and C is actually an old project.
Sure.
It's, it's old business, as we say, very old business, actually. A is completely new. I mean, it was envisioned in the past. It was in the books in the past, but we haven't done anything to even study that. So now it's time to do that.
Got it. So that seems to me enough consensus on B and C that we would write guidance to that effect. I think that there may be some work on exact language, but I will take that as enough consensus that we can move forward from 2, A, B, and C. And I appreciate the discussion. There probably will need to be more discussion, but next Tuesday perhaps. But we needed to surface those subjects. The third is the ART fleet electrification efforts, and I guess just a note, given the press of this week. Maybe if, I don't know, there are a lot of questions that we had last Friday, and so, several questions. So I don't quite know if they're published on our CIP website. They may be already. I haven't looked, but some of the questions were very helpful on bus fleet electrification. We got a full list of the buses and 2 or 3 pages from our transportation team. I guess I would start, the conclusion of those, here's the big picture of where I am on this, and I'll be happy to let colleagues have thoughts, is that this is a 3-year CIP, so we have to be mindful of everything that's been done, but I do think I'd like to point us towards direction that when we get to 2025, we would make a clear shift to purchasing electric buses from 2025 going forward. My impression of the science is that electric buses are way more advanced in their consideration than hydrogen buses, but I do, I'm open to being corrected on that. I guess the end of the questions mentions that 2024, the CIP includes 2024, a purchase of buses that I assume would be natural gas and so much cleaner than diesel. But, the question is, could we lift from the CIP the 2024 purchases either via guidance or amendment, or would a guidance suggesting that purchases going forward from 2025 on would be electric? That's where I am, because I feel like quibbling on the list that was provided in those answers is too detailed for this CIP. But I don't know if Ms. Cowan or Mr. Leach, your manager, you have thoughts on it. I want to signal a sense of the board to shift. I think it's reasonable that WMATA has started. I don't think 2045 is soon enough, but Ms. Cowan and Mr. Leach.
Yeah, I know we sent a, like, 3-page, single-spaced kind of response, so I realized it was long and a big chart with every bus and their mileage and repair time, so I know it was a lot of information, but hopefully it was responsive to all your questions. I think, though, if you get to the end of that document, what we've, suggested is the idea of a pilot with various vendors, not vendors, contractors, manufacturers, I never get that right, who are in this field and actually are participating in Buy America, which we know is a part of what our requirement is. And if we could get that, it will take time to get that pilot going, but get that up and running, so it would be done by calendar year '22. But then, to your point, the next, and Dennis will, have, of course, can speak to more details, but the next major tranche of purchases would be in ¡24, and with the signal that those would be electric. I think, what you're hearing from staff is, we're very mindful that we're struggling with ridership right now, and how do we stabilize transit? How do we bring people back? And I know that Dennis and Lynn and their staffs are very mindful of what we experienced 2 years ago with missed trips and lack of on-time performance, and not wanting to have our current fleet, the parts of it that are aging, face those same issues, and then have it be one more sort of reason for people not to get back on the bus. And so really focused on that operational constraint. And at the same time, we're talking about constructing the new facility and having to move the current buses to a new parking location and things like that. So a lot going on with transit and stabilizing the operation. But to your point, we are with you that we need to move to electric, and that we do have opportunities coming up and a way to test out the current technology. And so certainly that '24 purchase could be part of just exactly what you said, and then we'll have the ART O&M facility up and running in early '25 and headed on that right path. And maybe we need to find a different way to communicate it and lay that out as a plan, but that's, where we're at. And so that's like a 2-minute boiling down of 3 pages of a lot of dense verbiage. I don't know if that was effective or not, but that's what, where we're at.
That's very helpful. Mr. Leach and colleagues, did you have anything you wanted to add? Are you good?
No, I think
Yeah.
Ms. Cowan covered it really well from the transportation standpoint.
Great. Mr. Dorsey?
So what resources are we planning to devote beginning this upcoming or this current fiscal year to engaging with consultant expertise to determine the market, the design, the optimization, the implementation, and operations of an electric fleet? Because while I'm very interested in the pilot, I think so many other people have engaged in this work that we're far along the road of understanding what the capacity of the current bus operators will be in an environment like ours. That'll be useful, but we're not going to really be any farther ahead if we don't do all of the advanced work on planning for electrification. So how are we planning on doing all of that soft work, if you will, before we get to actual playing of vehicles?
In part of the 3-page response, and we recognize it was really dense, and you only got it yesterday. But one of the studies that is a partnership between transportation and our Office of Sustainability is looking at the ART fleet. And so that study is underway to look at all the things it's going to take to actually make a conversion.
Is that fully internal, or are we engaging?
No, we have engaged consultants in that, and it's being jointly administered by our our Office of Sustainability and Transit.
Okay, what are the timetables for deliverables and reports on that?
Yeah, Board Member Dorsey, the contract, as Dennis has alluded to, it's a joint transportation and air study. Demetri McBride is working very closely with the Transit Bureau Chief and Assistant Bureau Chief on the study, and we've just got a contract mechanism over the last week, and we will be working on that study. The timeline for delivery is Q1 of 2022. So that's going to tell us a lot of the benchmarking data and some of the market data on where EVs are for transit buses and what that looks like specifically for the ART fleet. So that's one data point. And then I would be remiss if we didn't indicate, too, one of the real pragmatic studies and design elements of this is being headed by the FD&C George May's team on the actual AOMF facility in Shirlington. Mm-hmm. That's very important, and we are also consulting there with Stantec to help with the actual design to make sure that the power supply coming into that facility, the transformers, and all that are being designed in parallel so that that overarching study will also be informed by and iterate. They're going to actually review some of that information to where we can understand what the requirements are on the ground as we design the AOMF facility at Shirlington. So I just wanted to mention that.
That's terrific, and this is all helpful for just sort of figuring out what the guidance is. And with that second piece of looking at the facility itself and the capabilities required, I don't know about Stantec's particular capabilities in this regard, but are we planning on engaging the people who are developing smart charging technology and all of the sort of current cutting edge, but will be sort of old hat technologies by the time that facility comes online in 3 years?
Yeah, that's absolutely what's going to go on between Stantec. Our AIR will be looking at that along with engaging with manufacturers and benchmarking what other transit facilities are doing. Whether there's a lot, you alluded to one of the touch points and one of the sensitivities. The state of the charging, that industry is changing as we speak very fluidly. And we're looking at that. And I think whether it's, gantry charging, whether it's plug-in charging, whether it's inductive charging, we're having to wrestle all those issues to the ground as part of that design for that facility at this time. So
I appreciate that because, I know a lot of people looking at this issue have this notion that they're going to have certain power draw requirements and are engaging utilities in that way, and they're designing facilities in that way. And, now people are actually deploying smart charging technologies that have a much smaller footprint, not to mention a much smaller electricity draw, which is really not requiring that facilities be designed in any different way. So I just encourage whatever you're doing to make sure we're taking advantage of all of the competencies out there to help us make the best and most efficient decisions with the new facility and everything that we do there.
The only other leg of research that's actively underway is that our transit staff have been contacting every other local property and other properties in the country that are going through conversions to get all of the lessons that they've learned in this journey. And that includes detailed debriefs with general managers of properties in the region and elsewhere. And so that too is sort of another set of inputs to really guide us to a best possible strategy for making the shift.
And if I could just throw one more in, then I'll yield the floor. So, Metro has certainly not satisfied a lot of people with its intended 20-year conversion schedule. A lot of other places that have done conversions have done so within 5 to 10 years. Is there any reason for us to not believe that Arlington, once we have done our due diligence, couldn't effectuate a conversion in the same 5 to 10 year period?
I don't want to actually give an answer that isn't sort of backed by facts. I think one of our Achilles heels in our program is land. And we're going to find that, again, depending on the nature of the technology, charging technology, it will inform how much land we consume with that infrastructure. And we're wrestling with that right now with the design of our Shirlington Operation and Maintenance Facility. We ultimately will have to face changes to our very tight light maintenance facility down at South East Street. So I think this is probably a little different than, say, a Fairfax Connector or a Ride-On, where they have big suburban facilities. We have to make it all work in relatively small amounts of land. So I think that will ultimately be a factor. And we'd also have to look at our fleet and the cycle time for cycling buses out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Ms. Crystal, and I see both of you as well.
To just pick up on that line of questioning, land is a constraint because for some time we'll be operating a mixed fueled fleet system, right? It's not necessarily that electric charging requires more land than fossil fuel charging does.
Actually, the electric charging infrastructure that's currently out there takes up more physical space than fueling with CNG or diesel. It actually reduces the yield of your bus operations facilities. And so that is a challenge for us.
But to be fair, that is changing and is likely not to be
Correct.
as true when this facility comes on.
Yeah, that seems right to me. I guess what I wanted to say for purposes of this guidance, I mean, I think on both our buses, the purchase of future electric buses and on the electric charging infrastructure at the Shirlington Road site. To me, it seems like the questions are all of how, the specifics on the how, right? We right now, the project is, at Shirlington Road has been scoped to include the infrastructure, the actual charging mechanics will come, right? And then with the electric buses themselves, I mean, I note in staff's response to us, there's the recommendation or the anticipation that in fiscal '24, the replacement of those 15 vehicles would likely be ideal for electric bus purchase. The how of that will come out of the study that will now be finished in Q1 of next year. So what I would say for my guidance, for my point of view on the guidance is, I think it's worth it for us to try to make some commitments about a date certain after which we are prepared to at least at this time commit to purchasing only electric buses. I think it sounds like from the staff response, it could be 2024. I'm happy to hear a little more if staff feels like it needs to be later than that. But we know that we anticipate having our new facility online latest 2026, right, in Shirlington Road. We know the way the technology is evolving that we'll have the study in hand to start purchasing 15 vehicles in 2024 and beyond. And so, you know, I understand that there's plenty of hesitance around saying our fleet will be entirely electric by a date certain. We're going to have to make responsible decisions about transitioning. But to me, I think we have the ability to commit to a date at which we're really going to jump off this cliff here, right, and commit to purchasing electric buses. And so as we think about this, that is what I'd love to see our guidance see. I think it's worth it for the county board to be on record, not only because they're advocates in our community that would like to see it, but because we have seen others around the region fly that flag, make that signal. I think it signals at a high and executive level what the work you all have already been doing, which is to put Arlington's interest out into the region and indeed the nation as we look for maybe opportunities for procurement and so forth. And so for my part, I'd love to see our guidance do exactly that.
Thank you, that helps. Ms. Garvey, and then Mr. Carantonis.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to work over the next few days, whether we want to get some date certains in there. I think that can be very helpful, dates certain. A couple of questions. It's occurred to me just, things are changing really rapidly, as we all know. Maybe at some point, instead of charging the buses, maybe we'll just switch out batteries. So you have on stack a bunch of charged batteries. I mean, I don't know if they'll end up making buses like that at some point. That's another, and that wouldn't, it seems to me, take the time or the space. So that would be a technology that might be coming along, which would be worth exploring. And then I don't want to take up too much time right now, but I was fascinated by the possibility of using gas from our water treatment plant for our current electric and gas buses. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Maybe not too much here, but that really looked interesting.
Yes, so that's something we are exploring. We have met with Washington Gas management on that aspect, and that was part of the solids master plan that was briefed to the board a couple years ago. So we are continuing to pursue that as an alternative, frankly, for a clean gas alternative that's even better than what we do currently with CNG. But that's one of the hesitancies with this on how long that our fleet may actually stay a mixed fleet for diversity reasons, but also to let that sort of run its course to see what the opportunities might be there. So we are still looking at that as part of, because we will have a gas byproduct from the anaerobic digestion that we're planning to have installed at the plant as part of the solids processing. So we can do a couple of different things with that gas. We can sell it back to Washington Gas. We can use it in the ART fleet potentially. So those are some things we're continuing to look at as part of the process.
Yeah, that's really cool. And maybe at some point burn it to make electricity to power the county or something. I mean, it's fascinating. So yeah, I think the bottom line here is where we are. I mean, there's a lot out there. There's a lot changing. We really would like you to stay, and I know you're doing that, just stay really close in touch and keep us apprised too. We're willing to, I don't know about jumping off a cliff. How about jumping into a nice big warm pool? Whatever the analogy is.
I don't know if that's the right metaphor.
Well, so I'm not quite sure either, but do things differently from what we're doing now. So thank you. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Mr. Carantonis.
Yep. I think biting the bullet is an appropriate way to refer to that, but because this means that there is no scenario where we won't have any problems. of transition. I don't believe that we ever would like to have a mixed fleet. I mean, we would have to have a mixed fleet for as limited time as possible, right? And I believe that the hesitance of my colleagues to, the discussion that we are having on whether it is reasonable to order the 15 buses now is based on the expectation that the electric bus, the product will mature very fast, and we will have solutions that are solutions that will be easier to implement and easier to buy and easier. So I have two questions about that. So number one is, we know that staff is working on an electric vehicle charging study. So what Arlington, the answers the question, what Arlington needs to have in place in order to provide a sufficient network that serves the needs both for private electric vehicles charging, also for public electric vehicles charging, including buses. Does this intersect at all? Does it provide us any decision points for thinking about timelines and implementation?
I feel like is Demetra on the line? Yeah, I think Demetra would be the right person to just discuss the nexus of those two, if that's all right, because I don't know that answer.
Yes. Okay. That just in order to be able to say yes, we will be ready by 2024. This is and I have to say, I was every single time I studied this, I was absolutely impressed about how much power we have to provide, how much more than we have today available, and electric, how much more of a requirements we have to make sure that the electric grid is delivering. So I'm not underestimating that. So the second thing is.
Is it possible we could get Ms. McBride's answer on this and then come back to you, if she's there?
Sure.
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
You can hear me. Okay, very quickly, in addition to the plans that Dennis Leach and Mike Moon just described for the ART bus fleet, we are also in the early launch of a community-wide Arlington County plan for decarbonizing transportation. And that is both a community and a pan-government plan. It also includes APS school bus fleet. It will look at market, technology, facilities operations. It'll have a literature review of other best practices, not just across the country, but across the globe. And it will also include a strategic charging network siting plan and other, supporting analytics and graphics and other assessments. So that's really a comprehensive plan for the entire community, both public sector and private sector. The key deliverables of that will be delivered by July of 2022. This was something that we did promise to the board at that within that time frame. At the time the board adopted the 2019 Community Energy Plan. The final report will probably be delivered later on in the year, but all of the key deliverables will be delivered by July of 2022.
Thank you. Does that help with the first question? You may have additional, I know you have an additional question.
That helps me with the first question. It would be very helpful to be able to, fit the plan of electrifying our bus fleet, including the school buses at the end, into this plan, because this is very important. Among other things, we don't only have to charge buses, as much as I understand that buses will be also batteries, so they will help us with peak demand management and other things. So there are many pieces that fall together. The second thing is, what exactly speaks against making an acquisition that would serve us for a pilot program? Let's say take a high ridership route, like the ART 41, for example. And how many buses would we have to have? Is it worth doing that, or do we have sufficient expertise and experience from other jurisdictions and other systems to know what we need, and we just have to look at the particularities of implementation.
So I don't know whether it's Mr. Leach or Mr. Moon, there's 1.5 million is mentioned in the question response. Mr. Leach?
The real challenge is it's relatively straightforward to do a procurement for alternative technology buses, say electric buses. The Achilles heel, the thing that really requires the thought and requires the time and design investment is on supporting infrastructure. So Art, today, we're focusing on trying to get service back out on the street, make sure it's reliable, so we're there when customers are ready to come back. We are going to be living in kind of an interim state, if you will, from now until 2025. So we'll be parking buses at a temporary site. We will have our maintenance in a converted garage out on Edsel Road, and then a very tightly packed light maintenance facility. To convert, say, the ART 41, I believe that takes probably at least 6 or 7 buses, because we run 15-minute service all day from 5:30 a.m. until after midnight. It's our highest ridership route. We simply would not have the supporting infrastructure or even a place to park that extra increment of fleet. And what we've learned from our other sister communities that are going the electrification route, they buy buses and they haven't solved the infrastructure problems. So those buses actually aren't out on the street delivering service. They may, if you have 6 buses, they may be able to get a couple out on the street in a given day. And so anything that we buy, we're going to need to keep out on the street, in service, picking up and dropping off customers. And so that is a really important consideration as we make our fleet investments and our infrastructure investments. For transit reliability is key.
Sure.
We need to be there for the customers, and they need to have confidence that we're going to show up.
Yes.
So that's, go ahead, Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you. And as Ms. Cohen has said before, it's the level of service that we are really focused on at this moment, right? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So to seek to synthesize, I mean, Mr. Dorsey mentioned, I guess I heard, there's an open question for me whether the 30 to 60-day pilot that's mentioned, whether there's, that I'll be interested in. If you say no need, then that's fine. But if additional resources in the form of small, well below 200,000, but whatever, if additional resources are necessary to complete that part of the pilot, I noticed it started in the fall. That's one area over the next week that I'd be looking to. And then the second point, I feel like synthesizing, we may be at a 2025 date, which wouldn't have the problem of the diffuse buses. But once we get to the new facility, at least I'm going to want to put a stake in the ground and say that new purchases from that point forward would be electric. That's the sort of guidance that I'd be inclined towards. And I think I should also note that there has to be some level of respect for the implementation challenges of the Facility South and trying to get on time. And I see Ms. Rivers in the back. And so I just want to at least say out loud that, you know, I'm aware that us saying we want to do this is much different from the pain of making it all happen. But if we don't say we want to do this, I'm not confident we will as soon as we should. So that's all I have. I don't know, Ms. Crystal or Mr. Dorsey. And go ahead, Ms. Crystal.
Yeah, that was really well put. And I really appreciated Ms. Cowan's admonition, too, that we have experienced service hangups in ART. And certainly our goals of reducing energy emissions for this community are not met if people start opting away from public transportation. So I think that is really important for framing. I just wanted to voice my support, as our chair did, for the idea of welcoming bus manufacturers to pilot their buses on our ART routes. I think not only do we gather valuable information, but it's a good signal for all of us, right, to see EVs in our community. The only question I wanted to ask was, as we wrap up on this topic, the estimate of $1.5 million for the pilot to purchase one bus and lay some of the kind of preliminary primary infrastructure that Mr. Leach was describing. In your answer to us, you noted that local funds would have to be used for this, but I know in Fairfax, for example, they just took advantage of the Clean Air Communities Program, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. Certainly much has been made of at least the proposal in the American Jobs Act of $25 billion for zero emissions public transit conversion if some version of that passes through Congress. Could we just say more about what we know about the landscape of state and federal grants for these types, or private sector grants for these types of pilots, and if staff could give us some insight into steps you can take or already are taking to pursue what feel like quite a few different pots of money that may be available for communities trying to do exactly this.
Sure. So I'll start, and Demetra may want to add, but David Fry, who's our grants administrator, and actually at one time worked at FTA, doing reviews of transportation agencies around the country, has been in ongoing discussions with DRPT, our state rail and public transit agency, in terms of potential grant programs. He's also reached out to FTA. DRPT is on a fairly regular cycle of grants, where our next cycle is February 22 for award in July. And then, every year after that. And it generally takes about 6 months to get those funds under agreement before they can spend. Our experience with FTA is the timelines are even longer. Our experience across DOT, from street projects to transit projects to capital bike share, expansion using federal lands funds, is it can take over 2 years from the time of award to actually getting the funds under agreement and actually being able to start invoicing the feds. So it's not quick. We think that this, our recommendation to you is to work with our CAO and to work with our procurement department to put together a robust pilot with manufacturers. It may require giving them incentives to give us product and support service. But to really kick the tires, there are 4 Buy America manufacturers now. If we can get all 4 interested in coming here and demonstrating their technology, including the charging infrastructure and having staff available, that to us seems like a real win. We could really learn quickly what's available, what's working, share those experiences with our operator, and then inform that next big tranche of bus purchases in fiscal '24. Thank you. That's the thinking.
I think Demetra probably could add here, if she could just chime in, because we just went through a grant application with APS, and so Demetra, I would turn it over to you.
Yeah, Dennis, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Just in terms of the state grants, the Clean Communities is a multi-part grant, as you know, that's funded through the Volkswagen settlement. And all parts of that program for buses, whether they be school buses or metro transit buses, are specifically restricted to replacing diesel buses at this particular point.
Interesting.
I don't expect that to change. There's also, for example, later on this year, a school bus replacement of diesel buses again, coming out of private institution, Amazon, I believe, that's going to be administered through the World Resources Institute, again, focusing on diesel buses, which they do have that fleet. We do have, in addition, because we realize that there may be some smaller opportunities in the state coming through the RGGI funds, as well as waiting, of course, for the federal stimulus and climate infrastructure funds. We have put one of our consultants on a monthly task order to review any and all federal, state, and institutional grants available, specifically focusing on transportation. And we just started that 2 months ago. So nothing has surfaced as of now. That's an opportunity. I expect them to become more available. We will have to compete for them. And we certainly hope to report back to the county manager as well as to the board as soon as those opportunities come to fruition.
That was really heartening. Thank you for that answer, Ms. McBride.
And Dimitri, just to confirm that we did, the funding we just put in for was the VW funding for APS, isn't it?
Yes, it was, Mike. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah.
Great, thank you for the question and the answer, and I feel confident that we would be nimble if there were federal stimulus money or federal money passed, that we would seek to be nimble there. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. So, we've certainly been focused on art, which I am supportive of, but I don't want to forget about STAR, and it looks like there have also been some recent innovations among some of the Buy American manufacturers in delivering some of the vehicles that are, typically of use in paratransit. So do we have the capacity to incorporate some thinking and advanced planning on STAR with this work that we're doing on the Muni bus fleet?
That's an excellent question. Right now, our STAR service is provided by two contractors. It's provided by Red Top and Diamond. And so the opportunity, and Lynn may want to join on this, the opportunity is when those contracts are up for negotiation to get into the space of the types of vehicles and the equipment that's provided.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leach. And Ms. Rivers, I'm sorry we're asking you to answer a question where there may have been an injury, so I'm sorry to see that, but.
How's the other one look?
Doesn't look very well. We're actually going to be putting our services, our provider services out to bid next year. And so that would be the opportune time for us to take a look at that and have that conversation, have that be a part of our scope.
Great, thank you. And, I would be remiss if I didn't mention something that I don't think has been mentioned as a part of this. Our collective urgency, thankfully, Ms. Cowan, for expressing staff's shared urgency to transition to electric vehicles. I do want to just make sure that everybody knows that we're aware, especially staff, that, Arlington was a market leader in moving towards compressed natural gas years before others did it. And it's the cleanest burning fossil fuel. We should be proud of that early action in that regard. We just similarly want to be early actors with electric. And at the very least, we don't want to be left at some point seeing that the world has moved forward in this direction and we're slow to catch up. So hopefully you understand that that sense of urgency is in keeping with the tradition. I know, Mr. Leach, you're proud of the CNG has been around in Arlington for so long, it just seems like it gets lumped in with all of the really dirty fuels, and it's not. And we appreciate that, and we're ready to take the next leap. So
We really want to thank you for those comments. One of the major drivers, no pun intended, for CNG was the concern for the pedestrian and the transit rider that's waiting at the curb.
yeah.
Particulate emissions with diesel is not good for anyone. And so Arlington made the early shift and pushed Metro to convert 4 Mile Run to CNG because of our concern for pedestrians. And what we see in our transportation research data is walking trips are so important to making this community function, and it goes hand in hand with transit. So whatever we do, we also need to keep in mind that experience of the people on those sidewalks and waiting at our transit stops.
Well said.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. The questions reveal, again, you're well-informed on this issue, and I sort of find myself, I don't mean to be, I'm just eager also for the next step. So everyone has offered thoughts. I think we're close to something that can work with respect to the leadership that we have shown to get to this point. And so we'll work over the coming week to see if we can get guidance, and I will welcome any colleagues. I'll take the ownership of working with Ms. Cowan to draft something, but colleagues, dig in and email me if you have any thoughts at all. So thank you each, Mr. Leach, Mr. Moon, Ms. Rivers, feel better. Thank you each for that. We'll go to our last of the 4 items of buckets. And I know, Mr. Carantonis, you mentioned another area of neighborhood conservation. So this item, in the course of our work sessions, we've had discussions of electric vehicle fleets, electric vehicle infrastructure. We talked a little bit, got the questions about Ballston and Bluemont. And I guess I feel as though we have the community energy plan coming, and I don't have any challenge. This year has been unique like last year was, but sort of looking forward, I feel like both the way this is worded, there's a format to illustrate implementation. I think that it's incumbent upon the board to learn what has been happening in all of the thought processes that go to some of these decisions. But I also feel as though it could help our public and some of the emails we've gotten to try and find a process or way that we would work on our community energy plan for next year's CIP. And so that's the genesis of this. I'm open to any thoughts on it. I think that I sort of made the caveat that I see to what we've put there. I will profess to being focused most on the community energy plan. Not that I don't understand and respect the transportation plan, but I think if you have a lot of priorities, it's less the shift that I think we would need. Ms. Crystal, go ahead.
I've been working on some language, given the sort of conceptual nature of the conversation. I don't think it makes sense to present it, but to maybe put a finer point on it. For recently adopted plan updates and commitments, namely Vision Zero and the Community Energy Plan, the CIP is the key vehicle for making progress on and achieving those goals. And so the board should be directing the manager to develop, as part of the upcoming 10-year CIP update, a clear presentation of which projects in the CIP align with these commitments, and importantly, how these projects taken together advance progress towards shared community goals. I think that's the piece that's really important. We both want a guide to reading the CIP through the lens of the Community Energy Plan and Vision Zero, but we also want to see how the projects across departments roll up to making progress towards the goals, because Vision Zero and the Community Energy Plan really are goal-based documents. Whether it's zero deaths and serious injuries, and we have a list of all of the, we started a list of priority intersections for tackling that. And Community Energy Plan, of course, has our date certain targets of when we want net zero county operations and net zero overall. So I do not profess to be an expert in how to communicate that. I'm still thinking about Mr. Leach's great word when he explained that our projects are matrixed. And so right now we know our transportation section is organized by geography, and I am desiring a way to see it organized by Vision Zero as well. And the Community Energy Plan, of course, cuts across every department of government. So this is no small task, but I would find it really helpful, because I actually don't think we can otherwise check in on what kind of progress we're making towards Vision Zero and Community Energy Plan. With affordable housing, we get, for example, annual reports. We see the results of our NOFO. We can check in on our progress towards our HMP goals. With those two, we're really looking at the CIP as the vehicle to get to those goals. So I'm hoping there's some sort of brilliant communications or data presentation and analytics mind in the county who can run with this. I'm sure it's Mr. Schwartz's, actually, who will personally design the graphics for that. But that's a little more specificity of how, anyway, I'm thinking about this guidance.
Thank you. That's helpful. To be fair, I want to hear Mr. Dorsey. We may not need quite as robust a discussion on this one, because I don't know that I've thought through all the pieces of it as thoroughly yet, so I want to be efficient with time. But Mr. Dorsey.
Yeah, I fully support it, and happy to work with Ms. Crystal and any others on proffering ideas for staff to noodle over how to organize this from a data or a thematic perspective. I just think this is a really useful thing to do from a civic perspective. These documents don't exist for us; they don't exist for staff. They really exist to help our stakeholders understand how we're going about the responsibility of providing for the community. And to the extent that we can begin to cross-link, this document and our budget with our existing plans and other things that are put out there for public consumption, I just think that will make for a better informed and thus better engaged citizenry. So I don't think that this is just an exercise to meet what is sort of the desire of the day. I think this is really a place where Arlington can stake some really important new ground.
Mr. Schwartz.
A little bit of an anecdote, and I shared this with Ms. Crystal, but I see Maria is sitting over there, and I'm not making this up, I swear. The last time we did a normal 10-year CIP was almost 4 years ago. And so when we were heading into our efforts in 2020, we spent a lot of time sitting around saying, you know, we have a document, and the document, it's a paper document, it's very frustrating to us as staff too. We want to know all the places where Vision Zero is touching all the various programs. So can we do cross tabs by putting data in? And then also visually have maps that show us. And so we were just starting on that project when the pandemic hit. And so we completely agree with your point, and it's going to be a work in progress. I want people to encourage people to understand there are so many different ways to slice the data. One of our goals would be to put the data up so that people themselves could slice it by putting that in, rather than us having to produce a book that was about this thick. So we're thinking about that. We're a big believer, I know Ms. Garvey will appreciate this, in colors and sort of taking a color from the wheel and putting it in various places. But we have some ideas on that. And we really welcome suggestions because we have a, really sort of, I think, thoughtful graphics team that is going to work on that.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Ms. Garvey?
Yeah, I think this is great. We're all kind of, I think, got the same problem, but we don't quite know how to get here. So I think we probably will with a lot of good minds thinking about it. It reminds me a little bit of many, many years ago on the school board. I remember we were doing some budget thing. I was asking some questions about outcomes on a project. And I remember the staff member looking at me a little bit like deer in the headlights. She said, outcomes? Because all they had used to doing was doing inputs. They hadn't thought about doing outcomes. And of course, now we've all evolved quite a bit, and we're doing that on the budget side. So I'm sure we can get there. But I think it's important for us to understand what we're doing and to be able to communicate it both. So thank you.
Thank you.
We can all kind of play with this one. We should get some good crowdsourced ideas, I think, from our public. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Mr. Carantonis?
I'm also completely in agreement that this is really necessary because it helps structure the mind and frame the view. I think that our comprehensive plan is the document of reference here, and how does the CIP help to accomplish the goals of the comprehensive plan. So this is indeed colorful. So it is good. So and it really helps. And this basic crosstabs we should be able to deliver. And then, of course, everybody else can do more analysis on that. But these 11 elements should be represented how each project fits in goal attainment in each one.
Got it. Thank you. So I think we have, I might just put a finer point on there's how we communicate, and I think this is accurate. If I were guessing, the ventilation work that we're doing that is proposed in the CIP in the jail, a fully electric building for this CIP, we probably didn't do that analysis at comprehensive depth. I wouldn't have expected that we would do that, given that we were trying to respond to a 100-year pandemic. And I could be incorrect on that. I know there's been some analysis, but I guess there is a substantive question there for me for next year that I would hope that, because we have all energy by 2025, all county energy by 2025 would be electric. That's one of the goals of the community energy plan. I should just surface that's a thought for me for next year. I do not want anyone in this room or anyone watching to feel guilty about what we are doing. It will be vastly more energy efficient at the courthouse, and that's a step forward. It's okay with me because we have 2035 for 100% renewable electricity, but I also think there may be some substantive changes in the way we would do work in addition to that would be driven by this, in addition to the different in formatting. Am I wrong, or is that?
I think that's true. And another thing which, again, is we have given some thought, and it's in its, I would say, if I said infancy stages, that would be an exaggeration, to let people know that there's a series of questions we've asked for each project and a series of answers that we're ticking through. So that, for example, if you are looking at our CIP and you say that in the jail that we're replacing a ventilation system, and you say, a member of the public, they won't say it quite this way, but why are they just replacing it with the same old technology? There's an assumption that we didn't tick through the other 3 or 4 alternatives. And there may be a way to display that, and it may be that we didn't come up with the right answers, but people should will get a higher sense of confidence with the answer if they know there were other questions we asked and answered. They could challenge us a little bit on the underlying assumptions, but yeah, I will say right now, not every answer is going to be electric. okay?
Yes.
It just isn't. But the fact that we go through the question and answer, and it may be, in this particular case, that we would have to knock down walls of, a facility or bring in transformers, and we couldn't do it right away, but maybe the next time through, we're going to do it because we've done that work. It'll give people need to have a higher sense of trust and confidence that we are thinking about this, and we don't need someone to remind us to think about it, because we are thinking about it.
Yeah. Ms. Cowan, I may have overspoke on that, but if there's anything you wanted to add, and that's helpful, and there's an assumption sometimes in life that if you don't know about it, it's not going well. Well, that's not the case. So I think we have come to the end of the items, except if there are other items on guidance that folks wanted to mention, and I know, Mr. Karantonis, you mentioned neighborhood conservation. That's a funding overall issue, but go ahead.
Funding overall issue, it's just about the possibilities the financial possibilities to assign a higher amount to the neighborhood conservation program. I think that, my takeaway from the work session we had from that was that, neighborhoods, all stakeholders of the program feel strongly that it's underfunded and that it undermines the program itself in its substance. So it's just a plea to see whether we can do something. I understand that it's a bridge CIP. Still, and this is why I'm not talking about park acquisition and other things that I would like to, but I do think that the program is delivering right now in neighborhoods. There are projects in the pipeline, so this could be a possibility.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis. Certainly share the sentiment and the hope. Maybe a little bit more focused on next year, but I'm glad you surfaced it. So I think that concludes the topics that we had. I don't see lights on for speaking, so we will stop there. Certainly, Mr. Manager or Ms. Cowan, if you have additional points, welcome to make them, but let's not take adjournment away from the possibility of moving forward. With that, that's the end of our work session. Thank you to our staff who's come, and we will have next Tuesday evening, 6:30 or later. The precise timing will be determined based on the number of pulled consent agenda items. We will have discussion. We've had the public hearing on this 3-year CIP. We've certainly been thorough today, and I appreciate all the work that Ms. Cowan and others have done. Before we close, I'll move for a closed meeting with one small exception. I just wanted everybody watching and those of us here to take one moment to notice that this morning, each of you, I think, has gotten the chance of doing it, with the exception of perhaps of Mr. Karantonis. We were awarded for the 4th year in a row the fittest city in the United States. So today I got to meet with a couple of folks to talk about that. I don't know whether every board member, this board member included, has been most fit over the last month. But we are working on it, and over 85% of Arlingtonians have exercised within the last. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Yes, the suits are fitting a little closer. So I will move that we convene a closed meeting. I move that the county board convene a closed meeting as authorized by Virginia Code Sections 2.2-3711A, 3, and 7 for consultation with the acting county attorney regarding the county board's litigation against pharmaceutical companies and others involved in the manufacture, distribution, and sale of opioids, where such consultation in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the board, and also that we move into closed session for discussion of the disposition of publicly held real property, where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position and negotiating strategy of the county. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye. 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 Motion passes 5-0. For our public, we will come out of closed session just to vote, so you may want to turn off the YouTube or the TV for now, and we are adjourned until we reconvene after closed session. Thanks, everyone. I move that the members will make a motion and then we'll ask for a roll call. The clerk will ask for a roll call vote that we will each vote on. And the whole vote. Oh, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, Kendra. The Arlington County Board back in session in open meeting after concluding our closed session. I move that the members of the county board certify that at the just concluded closed session, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under Chapter 37, Title 2.2 of the Code of Virginia were discussed, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered by the board. Motion, we have a motion and a second, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. DeFerranti?
Aye.
Mr. Dorsey?
Yes.
Mr. Carantonis?
Yes.
Ms. Garvey? And we're holding the vote for Ms. Crystal, is that correct?
That's correct.
She's not on the phone.
We will be yes, we will hold, Ms. Crystal will vote when we next have her available over the coming days and week. Thanks very much. With that, we are adjourned for today. Have a good night.